everyone's journey with eating disorders is really different, and I don't sit here saying that I know what it's like for everyone by any means. That's my experience, and I know people have much more significant and impactful experiences than I had. Was fortunate in a number of things. So this isn't everything's like this if you have an eating disorder, and it's not always as simple or as, not simple, but as seemingly quick and easy as I've dealt with. I do still deal with it day to day to a certain degree, but there are some people who it impacts their life long term with their health issues as well. So I think more importantly, it's talking to someone if you have a problem and you've recognized it, and if you have a friend who you think has an eating disorder or a problem in those things, speak to them, speak to their loved ones. Just try and don't ignore it. That professional help is the first step. And, it may be a story like mine, it may be completely different, but making sure that's the first step.
Yeah. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Let Me Take a Selfie podcast. And today I've got a bit of a different episode for you guys today. I'm quite happily sitting in my studio drinking a beer and eating some homemade beef jerky with a friend of mine, Marc. And Marc's actually going to be on the show as a not so regular Joe today to have a chat to us all and share us all his experience with probably a negative perception around body image and food association around that as well. And so I think this is a really important subject that, especially for males, especially in this context, that body image and association around food can affect the young males as much as it can affect young females, and that there is some awareness around that. And so I think it's a good one, if you were to know of anyone that you feel like should be listening to this, definitely be sending this episode on. So without further ado, we're going to get into it, and enjoy, guys. Cue the intro.
Welcome to the Let Me Take a Selfie podcast, where we talk about how you can get the most out of your life through your self-care and well-being. And now for your host, Ben Rashley.
Marc, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Look, I sort of gave it a bit of an intro before we started off here, but if anyone has seen the episode cover picture for this thing, they can probably already get a bit of an image of you. And so if anyone has seen you or knows you personally or has seen the cover image, you look like a fit male in his 30s. And you are a very fit person. You are a CrossFit coach in multiple gyms, but you also train a lot yourself, and you spend a lot of your time in the sports tech industry as well as a profession. And so you sort of do live and breathe exercise a lot and wellness a lot. However, looking at yourself now and what people would perceive you as, that hasn't always been the case. And as a younger person, you probably had a bit of a different experience as a child with food. Could you probably fill us in a little bit about that and about your childhood and sort of what you experienced?
I guess at the time, I'll certainly say I didn't necessarily always feel like a different experience. But that's kind of part of the problem, is it becomes your normal. So I, for the first time recently, I'm now currently about 103 kilos, and it's the first time I've been over 100 since I was 11. So as an 11-year-old, I was morbidly obese. 105 kilos, I think, was about as big as I got. I was relatively tall for an 11-year-old, but still, no matter how tall you are as an 11-year-old, 105 kilos is 105 kilos. And even then, it's not like I didn't exercise. I played rugby, I played soccer, I played tennis. I just ate poorly, didn't have an understanding of food, ate a lot of food, and it got a bit out of hand. So it wasn't really until, and this is kind of by chance, my mum went on Weight Watchers back in the day, so the food in the house became healthy. I think a lot of my overweight originally was around you eat what's in the house, and the culture in our family wasn't the healthiest eating, and I just ate a lot of it. So when the food became healthy, I started to lose weight. went to a birthday party one day and I'd already lost a little bit of weight. I ate a pretty bad meal and just had awful pain, which turned out that I was, think at the time, I don't know now, was the youngest male in the Southern Hemisphere to have their gallbladder removed for gallstones, which is typically associated with 50 plus overweight women. So I'd done a pretty good job in a pretty quick time to put on the weight. And what proceeded from there became I guess you touched on, an obsession with the weight loss side of things. And that became tied to a mix of things, from body image to the sport I was playing, to even a fear of having that pain again from the gallbladder and the gallstones. All drove me to the point from being 105 kilos as an 11-year-old. I was hospitalized for anorexia when I was 14. So I think I got down to about 46 kilos. Again, relatively tall. And I did hold on to a little bit of muscle mass at 46 kilos, so there wasn't much else there because I was still exercising a lot. So it was a pretty quick shift from being obese to being what was, diagnosed as anorexia. But at the same time, I think as much as it was anorexia, it was also an obsession with exercise that mixed into that. So I think my pediatrician said at the time I was eating enough for someone on a pretty strict diet, which is probably more than what someone who would be clinically diagnosed as anorexia would eat. Yeah. But I felt the need to exercise off every meal that I ate, as if each meal was going to make a difference to what I saw in the mirror or what I saw on the scale. And whether that was a lack of education and understanding of how it all worked, or whether that was just the mindset that I'd created. I remember having dinner with my family at our favourite little cafe where I grew up, and they served my favourite dessert, sticky date pudding. I ate that at the time, and then told mum and dad that I was going to the bathroom, and actually ran home instead, thinking that I would burn the sticky date pudding off that I just ate. Yeah. So that's as far as it went in terms of that need to exercise off everything.
Mm-hmm. Which is, and how were we back then?
I was 14 when I was hospitalised, so it must have been around that time that I would have done that.
So as a 14-year-old male, I remember what I was doing at 14, and it definitely wasn't thinking about what I was putting into my mouth and how I could burn that off. Did you find probably leading up to all this, was there any sort of external factors? I know you've talked about the gallbladder and things. Was there external factors about how you worried about how people perceived you? Was there sort of any going down the route of, is there teasing, bullying, things like that?
Look, I was, again, this probably comes back to the fact that it's often hard to see in, maybe more expected in women than males. It can be really difficult to spot, because mine wasn't. I was popular. I was maybe have copped one or two insults from a particularly nasty person, but no more than they would give to someone else who wasn't fat either. So it really, there was maybe some small aspects of that in relation to the positive feedback I got as I lost weight, more than not getting negative. But there was also there was an external factor around a family issue that we had at the time that in relation to my brother, which essentially meant that a lot of my eating and control of my eating and control of my exercise became a mechanism for me to control something. So I think if there was an external factor, it was probably more around environmental and kind of family, and that this became a mechanism of control. And it just happened to be that the one thing I could control in my life was eating and exercise, and had a direct result, which was weight loss, and that made sense to me. Whereas the chaos that was in my life around that, I couldn't control. So in essence, that would be the external factor that played a role. And I think that's kind of often overlooked as to, particularly in a chaotic environment, you don't look at the person who seems to have their stuff together and they're exercising, they're eating well, when in fact they maybe in my case, was going too far in that direction.
And as you were working through this and sort of obviously going down this journey of eating the way you were but having to burn everything off that you ate, did you find that that whatever you did wasn't enough?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, definitely. I mean, there was times when you always felt like there was more and more that you needed to do, but I think it also just became in the moment you don't think that.
Yeah.
In the moment, it is just obsessive, and you think more is better. Is probably a better way to say it. In the same way that I felt like if I could, I tracked all my calories on my food was one of the things that I did at the time. And I mean, to this day, I can probably still name the calories of just about anything you put in front of me. But it became obsessive to the point where, well, if I can do 1,400 calories in a day, then I can probably do 1,300. And if in the same day, the next week, I did the same exercise, but I did 1,100, that's even better. So it was almost like winning more than it was anything else. It was borderline getting competitive. And I saw that lower was better, and more exercise and less calories was better.
Yeah. And so calorie counting, it's not that you weren't shying away from what you were eating, but you're calorie counting as a 14-year-old.
Correct. Yeah, I was obsessive about the numbers, and that's something that's kind of and we might get into it in a bit, but that is a bit of a trigger for me now too, in terms of even to current day and calorie counting. I've talked to people all the time, and it's for some people it's really good, but I think it's also a slippery path sometimes, because people can get a little bit too obsessive around those numbers, depending on what your goals are.
And just probably, I'm going to rewind just a little bit. And you said that you're, 46 kilos, 46 kilos at 14. How tall are you, Marc?
6'1".
6'1".
Yeah.
So back then you might have been...
Pretty tall, 5'10",
5'10".
I'd done most of my growing.
Yeah, so my height.
Yeah.
And you're at 46 kilos. Yeah. That's tiny. That really is tiny, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was, I remember one of the first times, it was actually my parents had seen it, but it was a friend talking to my parents and being worried about me that really pulled the trigger on this has kind of reached a bad point. And the first time I had a consultation with a pediatrician, and I'm sure they do this with everyone going through an eating disorder, once they see someone, is they ask you to draw yourself what you see. And it was so different to what reality was.
So how did you draw yourself?
Nothing, I didn't draw an obese person or anything like that, but I drew someone who had a bit of curve, a bit of shape, like a bit of weight on them, essentially. And that just really wasn't the case. So it does really warp your perspective, especially when you're that deep into it.
Yeah, and I think that's quite interesting, and like even with how you've sort of looked at it and gone, you didn't draw yourself as an obese person, you draw yourself with some sort of curve or fitness to it, whereas there is actually a 46 kilo, 5'10", 5'11" beanpole drawing that picture.
Yeah.
And I remember as a kid watching a documentary on she was quite a famous anorexia case, Bronte. I don't know if you ever saw that, maybe a bit before your time. Yeah. And I remember specifically, and I would have been in my early teens when I was watching this, and I remember specifically her standing in front of the mirror, and they asked her what she was seeing when she's in front of the mirror, and she goes, an overweight person. And this girl was literally skin and bones, oxygen tank, everything, it's quite shocking for someone who has never had an eating disorder and has always had a very positive association with food to see something like that and see someone look at themselves like that and you go, how do you see that? But it's a mental perspective as well, isn't it? And it's completely distorted.
And it's a big part why I think, the treatment of these kind of things these days is shifting a lot from a medical focus to a psychologist or a mental, because it's, as much as the issues related to it are, physical, it's not as simple as eat more and you're better. It's really ingrained in kind of a way of thinking and perception. And, I've had parts of it have stuck with me. Been in a really good place for a really long time, but I still have parts of it that I'm sure people don't have. People who haven't experienced that don't necessarily think the way I do about certain things. I've learned to understand them and control them and make them, in some ways, use them to my advantage. Not everyone gets to that point, but they don't just go away.
Yeah.
It's a long-term thing that you have to learn to deal with.
Yep. Excuse me, I'm just eating my jerky.
I'll have a sip of my beer.
This is awesome. I like this. So, going back to probably having a chat about counting calories, and you said it can be, you being a coach, and you coach, how many hours a week? I know it's your side job. But
these days, only a couple hours a week, but there's been times where I've coached 15, 20 hours a week at different times.
And there was a point where you were actually about to buy a CrossFit box yourself.
It's close to, nearly made that jump.
Yeah, so it almost became a full-time career for you. And when you talk to sort of, the clients that you train, and they are talking about obviously watching what they eat, which is nothing wrong with watching what you eat, but then they start talking about quite obsessively about counting calories. And as you said, counting calories can be a really slippery path, depending on what your purpose is. When would you say that counting calories is good? And then when is it counting calories probably something that you want to be a little bit more aware of, or people around you to be a bit more aware of?
I think, it's, and I'll caveat this with almost the one thing you say for everything in the fitness industry, it will depend. But there are some kind of rough versions you can kind of give that where it is a little bit more black and white. And I think a really good thing that counting calories can do is help to teach someone what food is made of. Because a big part of the problem with people who are overweight or is not understanding what's good, what's bad, what quantity of something is good, what quantity is maybe a bit too much. So I think in the short term, understanding what a calorie is, what makes up a calorie, calories in, calories out, at its most basic level, and there's other things that can play into it. There's hormones, all different things can play into someone's ability to lose, gain, or maintain weight. But at its core, calories in versus calories burned is the most basic way to look at it. And to get someone to understand what a calorie is and how much calories in each different type of food is really good, particularly for someone who has no understanding of that. So if I was to talk to someone for the first time, I would probably be sitting there suggesting maybe count for 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is, to start to understand what's in your food. From then, you can start moving away from that, because I think the problem becomes, unless your goal is really specific, and now we might be talking, I want to, be a professional, do a bodybuilding show where you really are trying to dial in and become a specific metric to be on that stage, or you're doing a sport where you have a weight class and you actually have a really strict regime to be at a certain point. That's where every individual calorie makes a difference. For your average Joe who's trying to lose a bit of weight, look better in front of the mirror, if we can get them to a point where they can understand roughly what's in the foods they eat, and roughly not count to an anal degree, but understand kind of, I've had too much, I've had too little. That's your goal. The goal should never be to be this continuous path of counting and counting and counting, because that's when it can become too obsessive. But I'll also say at the same time, it also comes down to someone's personality traits. For me at that time, with everything that was happening in my life, that version of control is probably what pushed me. And even now I have some tendencies that are maybe a little OCD. And that's what led me down that path. There's plenty of people who could probably count consistently for ages and forever and be quite focused on it and not go down that path. So there is a little bit of a personality trait that comes with that. So it's more of not a don't count as much as it is a caution. I think that people need to understand that if everything that should never live and die with that. So it's okay to not be doing it, or to not hit things occasionally, and you shouldn't be it's not success or not success.
Yeah.
Based on that.
Yeah. And I might put a little caveat in with that as well. It's like you spoke about, if someone's goal is to look good and feel good in front of the mirror and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, is there?
No.
And looking good and feeling good in front of the mirror doesn't always mean a certain perception that we might see on social media. You can come in every shape and size and still look good and feel good in front of the mirror. And it's completely up to how you would perceive that as a person.
And I think that's part of the slippery slope as well, is that comparison, because, and it comes in a few formats. I mean, the most basic, and probably one that maybe links back to It's probably still the case now, but I know when I was growing up, the comparisons you made was to the cover of Men's Health or something like that. And that, in essence, is ignoring the fact that, hey, a big chunk of photo shoot models are on steroids because that's fine to be. You can do it healthy. They're not in a sport that's tested. Their purpose is to look good in front of a camera. It's also photoshopped. They're also only in that state for a very short time for the photo shoot. They're not necessarily walking around looking like that. But when you compare yourself to that and you think, well, I'm putting in the time and effort and I don't look like that, therefore I need to put even more time and effort, or I need to eat less because I'm not hitting that. So there's that part, but there's also just the simple fact that genetically we're all built differently. You can't necessarily look like someone else. I'm someone who for years used to be annoyed by the fact that I couldn't really pull off like a six-pack like a lot of other people can, and just genetically, no matter how low my body fat is, it's not something that shows up that well.
Yeah.
The ridge lines of the abs, everything like that is different. The same as like there might be someone who the last place their body stores fat is their stomach. So they can actually be at 14, 15% body fat, not eating that healthily, not even exercising that much, and they might have a six-pack and they just hold their fat elsewhere genetically, more so than anywhere else. And so you've got to kind of appreciate the fact that you can't compare yourself to someone else, because there's some things you just cannot do that they can.
Yeah, exactly. And, going back to episode 15 with Mel O'Neill King, he quoted Theodore Roosevelt about that and said, comparison is the killer of all joy.
Yep. And it's worse now with things like Instagram, because that's the easiest way to compare yourself and scroll through and even see people who you think aren't these elite celebrities who maybe it's easier not to compare yourself to.
Yeah.
You start seeing the everyday Joes who somehow look what you want to look like,
Yeah.
but you don't know their backstory. You don't know whether it's genetics giving them... They probably work really hard. That genetics isn't an excuse to say you don't work hard, but it is an excuse to say that they're able to create something that maybe genetically you can't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? And going back to, obviously, you said that, what used to annoy you is that how your abs looked. Whereas, going back to episode 15 again, I think I described you as an Adonis. Do you know what I mean? So, and how I perceive you to look. And it's, it's how different is that? And getting back to that, like how your abs look doesn't change how, if you're wanting to be fit and healthy and perform, your abs having, how your abs are shaped or whatever isn't going to change that. And it's not going to make any difference whether they look the way you want them or doesn't look the way you want them. Going back to that. So, and you have a look at yourself, like we were speaking earlier on today when you came over for lunch, you were telling me about that you made it into, what was it, the quarterfinals of the CrossFit Open.
Yeah.
This year for Australia, is it? Or
Oceania, yeah.
For Oceania.
Yeah.
And then you came in the top, was it 23 for one of the events in that as well. So it's not like we're talking about some gym hack here. Like you're actually quite fit, healthy and athletic to be in that comparative state, right? Yet you don't look like the front cover of a Men's Health magazine.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like it's not, and this took a long time for me to accept, and CrossFit can get a good name and a bad name for a number of different things. I think done well and done properly, it is a great option if it's the right thing for you. But for me, one of the big things for it was finding the why for doing things. So that big sort of mindset shift. For me, early days when I had my issues, particularly the issues were particularly bad around eating and exercise, the why was always to look like someone else, to do this, do that. It was very focused on the numbers on a scale. And in essence, particularly if you're doing strength training and if you are morbidly obese and the goal is to get to a healthy body weight more than it is strength training or anything else like that, then scale numbers matter. But to a certain degree, if you're not morbidly obese, the scale numbers mean nothing. And that took me a long time to let go of. And even now, I'm not the biggest fan of jumping on a scale. I've put on 12 kilos in the last 6 months. And I'm now getting to the point where I'm kind of okay with that. But when you can shift that mindset to start thinking about, and for me, and it's different for everyone, but for me, it was performance. So once I started doing CrossFit, as an example, coming from a semi-professional rugby background, stopped doing rugby, CrossFit gave me something where when I walked into a gym, it was no longer standing in front of a mirror and curling a weight or bench pressing a weight thinking that I want the image in the mirror to look better. It became, I want to hit a heavier deadlift. I want to be faster on the rower. I want to be fitter in a workout. I want to be stronger at this or stronger at that. And when that became the focus, the numbers on a scale become irrelevant. To a certain degree, the obsession with food becomes more of I just need to fuel my goal, which is this year it's squatting 200 kilos. I know I can't do that if I'm not eating enough to squat 200 kilos. And a lot of the time, 9 times out of 10, your body will then, the image you see, you end up with the goal you're after anyway, previously, but not because you're obsessed on what's in the mirror. You're controlling what you can control, which is I'm going to eat well and I'm going to eat to perform as good as I can in the gym, and your body does the rest.
Yeah. And so it is still really important to be able to sit back and really dissect what your true intention of what you're wanting to achieve. You know, and you could look back and ask me and go, well, Ben, what's your goal? I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, 200 kilo squat. Now, I'm not going to achieve a 200 kilo squat, and I don't want to put in that effort to achieve a 200 kilo squat either. That what has to come with that. I'm quite happy the way I train. And just being fitter and healthier. But that's my true intention. And so being quite true to that's really important. It's like, yeah, I'd love to be able to say I have a 200 kilo squat, but I don't want everything that has to be done to come along with it.
And I think the key word you hit on there was you're happy with your training. And I think that's one thing that when it comes back to any exercise or even eating, like I think a lot of people talk about the perfect diet. There is no perfect diet. The perfect diet is whatever diet you can adhere to. And it's as simple as that. And if in essence, I don't even like the word diet, it's whatever healthy eating pattern you can adhere to.
Yeah.
Because the perfect diet on paper might be the most boring food in the world and you hate life doing it. You might do it for 12 weeks and you might lose your 20 kilos you want to lose. But I guarantee you in 12 weeks later, you'll have put a big chunk of that back on again. If you can find a pattern that means that you're enjoying what you're eating, you're enjoying the exercise you're doing. And it's the same as me. I mean, my goals for exercise shift because I'm not a professional athlete. And so for me, why am I going to go in and do something I don't want to do? I want to go and do something I want to do. Now, if that means that my goal is a 200 kilo back squat at the moment, awesome. Last year it was, let's get my 5K row sub 16 minutes. And that's fine because I've still got to focus, I've still got a plan, but I'm doing the things I enjoy. And if you're going in and doing things you don't enjoy, you're not going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as that.
So before you sort of briefly touched on looking at food now, and you look at food in a way that, well, what do I need to eat to sustain or get to my goal? Okay. As opposed to, well, I'm eating and now what do I have to do to get rid of that, burn it off? How has your experience as a child or when you were a child changed or probably influenced the way that you decide to look at food now?
I think it's certainly meant that I think education around food is probably is a big reason why a lot of people are unhealthy. And as bad as or as negative as my experience was as a child, it did teach me a lot about food. So it's very, very easy for me to make smart choices now, just because I know. And it's also very easy probably for me to get down that slippery path again like someone else. But I do have a really good base knowledge of kind of what's in food, what's good, what's bad, what's the normal amount, what I need to fuel something. And a lot of people just don't have that. That's kind of quite common. But it's probably also, for example, as a kid, a big part of the negative side was a fear around eating bad food, that like one meal of bad food or one bad night changes what you see in the mirror or ruins everything, all the effort you've done. So probably one of the big changes from that is understanding that, one meal, one thing, like you shouldn't be not enjoying life to focus on eating good food all the time or focus on your exercise. It's a balance. And that's probably the big thing that's changed. So the positive to come from what I learned as a kid was just understanding food, what it can do for you, what's good, what's bad. And then the negative that around then was that I still get sometimes, and it's essentially I've created a few little rules in my adult life, probably since I was about 16, 17. One of the big ones being if I ever start turning down a social situation. So if I say to a friend, I'm not coming for beers, or I'm not going out for dinner tonight because I didn't want to eat or drink those calories, or I felt like if I start making those decisions, I know I'm in a bad place again. So that's kind of a little checker box thing that I sort of keep in the back of my mind. And I still have to have that there because I still have those thoughts occasionally where I'm like, oh, I've eaten bad for 2 days. Maybe I shouldn't go out at all. Or maybe I shouldn't do this. Where in reality, in a good space, I might recognize I've eaten poorly for 2 days. And when I go out, I'll still have the beers, but maybe I'm not stopping for a kebab on the way home or something like that. Like it's a little bit of a balance, but I don't let it take over my life.
Yeah. From your own experience, is there anything you'd like to say to those people out there listening that may be struggling with their own body image?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is probably almost comes back to that comment about enjoyment and being happy. If your body image, and again, it will depend on everyone and kind of what the exact issue they have is their body image, but at its core, you can only control certain things. And moving forward, the easiest way to do that is to find the things that you enjoy within that healthier space and just focus on those. The results come. So for me, it was the performance side. So I found that by focusing on performance, that became my why. The picture, the image in the mirror, the numbers on the scale don't matter as much anymore. For someone else who's, maybe their goal is weight loss and their issue might be around, whether it's fast food, things like that. It's okay. Well, let's find a food that you really enjoy that isn't bad for you. It's constantly looking for those options where you're not feeling like you're every day having to make a sacrifice, because that's not sustainable. And the other thing as well too is, talk to someone about it. That's probably the biggest, to be honest. It is essentially normal to have problems around eating and exercise and health, and it's okay to talk to someone about it. And it doesn't have to be a formal psychologist. It doesn't have to be even seeing a dietitian. Even if it's a matter of you've got friends you're close with and you can just open up about how you're feeling about it, getting that feedback can be awesome. It can be as simple as, we spoke before about the fact that what I saw in the mirror and the documentary you saw, they saw something completely different to everyone else. Getting that feedback from someone you trust can be really important. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, maybe it is seeing someone who's a third party where you don't mind sharing with them because you're not around them every day, and that might be a psychologist or even a dietitian. But getting that actual feedback from someone else so that you're not sitting in your own head and comparing to others without that discussion.
Yeah, and it's not a sign of weakness to talk to someone about anything.
And I think it was even there was more of a stigma around it when I was younger. It is changing slowly. It's still not changing as quickly as it should, particularly for the male population around eating disorders. I think for women, and certainly I very much could be wrong, but it's almost not expected, but it's become common to practice that. I don't think I would know a female friend who doesn't have a friend or themselves who had some kind of eating disorder or issue with eating. And that's spoken about quite publicly, and even they share it amongst themselves to a certain degree, or they've shared it with me really easily, but you just don't see it with males. And some of that I think is the fact that a lot of the male eating disorders is disguised by the fact you'll find it's quite often those who are visually very fit. I think exercise obsession, and what comes with that is usually some sort of obsession around food, isn't always a healthy thing. It's fine if you're loving it and it's what you truly want to do, but I think there's a lot of people spending far too many hours in the gym and far too many hours concentrating on meal prep and food to achieve this perfect body or to be this person who maybe they don't really want to be that anyway, but they think they should. And I think having those discussions might actually open up some of those people to realize that, hey, it's okay if I'm just in the gym a few days a week and eating pretty healthy and living my life.
And I'm me.
Exactly.
So many times that we get to a certain point or a certain point of aesthetics, and I'm not talking about my own personal physical aesthetics. You might be talking about that sports car that you wanted or that big home that you wanted, and you get there and you're like, well, that's not enough. I need the next thing. And that's that slippery slope you're talking about too.
Being okay with who you are is a big part of it. And again, it comes back to that why as well, because, you can look damn good in front of a mirror, be generally pretty fit, and still enjoy beers on the weekend, or if you doesn't even have to be drinking, enjoy a night out at a really nice restaurant that's a bunch of pasta and dessert, and that you can have all of that. And a lot of people, I was one of them for a long time, thought you couldn't have that and still be happy with your body image. Like that to be at that kind of image that you wanted to be, everything had to be perfect. When in reality, once you are 80% of the way there, it's not easy, but it's really achievable to get to 80%. That final 20%, which, to be honest, for me in my position, doesn't matter to me. And that comes down to an easy way to look at numbers would be like, you think about body fat percentage, and again, genetics can play a role in this a bit as well, but to a certain extent, you can get down to pretty much having kind of a bit of a six-pack, looking good in front of a mirror, being maybe 10, 12% body fat, maybe even 14, and you can do that while having a really balanced life where you enjoy life and do whatever you want. But to go to that 8%, to be that cover model, it takes everything. It's fine to do it if you want, but you need to understand that it takes everything, and that's the sacrifice you make, and understand, do you really think it's worth it?
Probably the last thing, because you sort of give us a bit of tips in that last little part. For our listeners, if you could say that there was one thing that was instrumental in helping you get through your journey and continuing you to get through your journey as well, what would it be?
I've touched on it before, but I'll share a bit more about kind of where it's first started. It's the why. I think that's understanding why you're eating the way you're eating or exercising the way you're exercising is more important than anything else. For me, to go back to the period when I was 14 and I was hospitalized, I was really lucky. I was really only hospitalized because my pediatrician was going away, and at the time I was seeing him regularly, and I couldn't, and he didn't really trust not being able to see me. So I wasn't at a state where hospitalization was critical by any means. I was also fortunate that I wasn't at that super lightweight for very long. So a lot of people aren't as lucky as I am, and if you're at that lightweight for a long time, you can have some serious long-term effects, bone density issues for your life, all sorts of things. I basically came out of it with, I get sore eyes when I look at a screen for a long time, because whilst at that lightweight, your body looks for any nutrients. So my eyes dried out, basically using the juices there. My retina's got a little bit damaged. Eyesight's fine, but I get sore eyes, and that's pretty much it. And a big reason as to why I got out of that stage so quickly was, and it sounds trivial, but I was told I couldn't play rugby anymore until I hit, I think it was 70 kilos or what was considered a healthy weight. Now, that meant that I started eating. That was my why. It didn't mean it fixed the mental side of things by any means, and that's not saying this is a quick fix to fix things immediately. It takes time, and I'm still working on those things. But that was the first example to me of how critical and how important that why is. And it's going to be different for everyone. I was maybe unique or lucky that there was a really specific, easy example that was like, cool, we're stopping. You can't do this because it's physically not healthy. If you put on the weight, you can. And you can find that with most people. You can find something where it's like, this makes sense. But that's carried through now to everything I do, and to all the things that have been improvement. It's kind of, why am I rocking up to the gym? It's because at the moment I'm really excited about getting to a 200 kilo back squat, or I'm really excited. That's what gets me up in the morning to go to the gym, or, it's that why in whatever you do becomes important. And even the social situations that I mentioned, why do I want to go and hang out with my friends if there's bad food there? Because I want to go and hang out with my friends. The why is that. The why isn't the bad food or anything else. That doesn't make a difference. So for me, I think that's the one thing that carried throughout.
And I think the funny thing about, the why is if when as you said, you're fortunate with that, but finding out that why that is a bit of a contract breaker or a deal breaker. If you are like this, but you can't do that, and that's something that was really beautiful and important to you, is that enough inspiration to sort of help keep you on path sometimes? Because, you still play rugby.
I went back the first time this year for 6 years. So, back to rugby.
There you go.
Hence the putting on 12 kilos.
Well, yeah, that's it. And you're not paying for a slouch of a club either.
And it's also the 12 kilos for me is okay now. Someone who's struggled with putting on weight or not seeing scales up. But my why is to play top level rugby. I couldn't do it at my lighter weight. I'm just not. Mass moves mass. You need to be heavier.
Yeah.
I'm still the smallest forward by 10 kilos. But I knew I needed to put on weight, so I became okay with it.
Yeah.
It served a purpose, and that made it okay.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Marc. Thanks for the chat, and thanks for actually really opening up and sort of putting your history out there for us all to listen to too. I think that's it's been a lovely thing to be witness to. Even though I've heard a lot of it already, it's to actually get it in one big package and for you to be able to tell the people out there about it as well. And hopefully, it's one of those subjects where you hope it doesn't resonate with too many listeners. But at the same time, if your story and journey can resonate with, or has a potential to resonate with some people, does this help them? And I think that's really important. So thank you very much for that.
No, pleasure.
Usually I say the next part of this subject is actually about the hardest questions in the room, but I think we've already had the hardest questions in the room for you today. So,
and as an avid listener, I know the questions that are coming. So
I do. So I didn't even share these questions with you, but thank you that you are an avid listener, that you do know what's about to come up. So yeah, we've got the rapid fire questions, and it's 5 questions that every guest gets as well. So just for us to learn a little bit more about you, if we haven't learned enough about you already. Ready to go?
We're good.
Perfect. What is your morning ritual?
Coffee is just the absolute first thing in the world. Fancy coffee machine at home was the first gift to myself when I bought my place. Also lists. So I'm a big list person. So usually my ritual is coffee, and then at some point in the morning is writing kind of a to-do list for that day, kind of minimum to be success, and then kind of if there's time, great, let's do these other things as well. Very, very recently, in the last week, I've actually kind of formalized that more into a morning journal, which I'm enjoying. But it's really just an extension of kind of some of the things I've done in the past.
Favorite health habit?
I knew this question. I really couldn't think of it. I was trying to think of a specific example. My example is probably going to be really boring, and it's going to be water. I, as most people who know me, hate the fact that I'm the person who every time we go anywhere, I'm immediately looking for a bathroom. But I feel terrible when I don't drink a lot of water. And I think it's probably one of the biggest things for feeling better, even for people trying to lose weight. It's just, half the time you're dehydrated and you don't know it.
What workplace or productivity tool could you not live without?
So this one is super simple. It's simply a timer. So something I've found probably the last 2 years, and particularly during COVID, it helped more than anything else, where it's really easy to get distracted working from home, has been setting a clock, focusing on a task. I'll set a timer for 20 minutes. I'll work hard for 20 minutes. I'll then set a timer for, depending on the day, either 5 or 10. If I'm feeling a little bit lazy, it'll be 10. And that 5 or 10 is free time. And I get a lot more done doing that, even if those 10 minutes is watching YouTube or doing something random, than if I just sat down for half an hour and just worked without a clock, because when the 20 minutes is on, I put my head down and work.
Awesome. I like that one. What is your life motto?
Probably control the controllables and be okay with what you can't. It's probably one of the things that's, once you start accepting there's things that you can't control, they're a hell of a lot easier to let go.
Yeah. Life is what happens between your plans, right?
Correct.
Brilliant. So I have one last plug for you, and that is the elevator pitch. Now, if you were in an elevator with someone and you had 20 seconds just to probably put a message across to them in sort of slight subject of what we've said today, what would it be?
Being healthy, happy, and not even necessarily fit, but being healthy and happy and being happy with what you see in the mirror isn't hard when you understand what you want. And you can really simplify things, and it doesn't need to be as complicated as you think.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Marc, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing everything with us today. Guys, if you liked what you heard on today's show, please make sure, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, and also please let anyone know that you feel like this is really important for them to listen to. Share it out there, share it with the world as well. And last but not least, guys, don't forget to give yourself permission to go take a selfie. Cheers.
I don't know if I'm showing off.